If you want to understand Russia in 2026, don't look for anger where it should be. You won't find mass outrage over the collapsing economy. You won't find public grief over the dead and maimed soldiers. Not because people don't feel it, they do, but because in Russia, the most dangerous thing you can do is aim anger upward. So the pressure does not disappear, it reroutes. And that's why Russian social media looks deranged to outsiders. A country is bleeding, and the public is erupting over things that feel absurdly small. A celebrity lawsuit, a party dress code, a stupid new app, a minor scandal that suddenly turns into a national moral war. This is not Russians being emotional. It's a survival strategy. When criticizing the state can buy you years in prison, society learns a trick: safe anger. You take the rage you can't say out loud, fear, shame, helplessness, grief, and you dump it onto a target that won't get you arrested. The wrong enemy becomes the only enemy you're allowed to hit. I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today I'll show you what 4 years of Putin's war did to the Russian nervous system, how it taught millions to aim their anger sideways, downward, and outward, while the real source stays untouchable. Here's our roadmap for today. The safe anger map, how rage finds replacement targets. The real average Russian, who actually lives inside this system. The untouchable enemy, why the West became a perfect safe target. The eighth sin, the sin of transfer, and how it locks the pattern in. Escaping the action, why safe anger feels like action, but is really postponement. If you want to keep this kind of analysis independent, you can support the channel through Think Tank membership, PayPal, Super Thanks, or High Points on mobile. And if you are listening on Spotify, hit follow so new episodes land in your feed. Now, let's build the map and name the wrong enemy. The safe anger map. Safe anger is redirected anger. When you can't complain about the real thing, your nervous system still needs an outlet. It needs a target that feels close enough to hit and safe enough it won't get you in trouble. In Russia, the war is the giant elephant in the kitchen. Everyone hears it breathing. But if you point at it, you can lose your job, your freedom, and your life as you know it. So people get angry at what they are allowed to rant about. There are 4 rules. First, the target must be legit. You can't scream, "The war is a disaster," but you can scream, "The school roof is leaking and no one's fixing it," or "There are too many migrants in our city." Second, the target must be real, not abstract or ideological. A price tag you can photograph, a broken heating pipe you can touch. Third, attacking the target must feel morally justified. You should expect approval, even applause from others. Fourth, it must give you the illusion of agency. You can't make the Kremlin listen to you, but you can rage past. You can shame a company, blame a mayor, report a neighbor, or boycott a store. That makes you feel like a person who has some power. Here is what that looks like in practice. In February 2026, Russia moved to fully block WhatsApp and began openly pushing people toward a new state-backed messenger called Max. For millions of Russians, WhatsApp had become the basic infrastructure of everyday life. Families used it to talk to relatives abroad. Small businesses used it to communicate with customers. Volunteers used it to coordinate help for soldiers and refugees. It was not just another app. It was the plumbing of daily communication. But the public anger that followed had a very specific shape. People did not say The government is isolating the country and tightening digital control during a disastrous war. That target was forbidden. Instead, the anger focused on what was safe to criticize. People complained that Max was buggy, that messages didn't go through, that the interface was ugly, that the developers were incompetent. Bloggers mocked their rollout. Users posted screenshots of errors and joked about the app crashing. The rage was real. The frustration was real, but the target was carefully redirected. Instead of questioning why the state was cutting the country off from global communication platforms, the public debate revolved around something far safer: how poorly the new app worked. The elephant stayed in the kitchen, and everyone yelled about the broken furniture instead. You can see the same logic in the pressure on Telegram. Telegram is where Russia's news, gossip, war chatter, business deals, and survival information live. When officials float the idea of blocking it, the panic is immediate, because the phone has become the last private room many people still have. But again, the anger rarely moves toward the real center of power. People don't say openly the state is slowly sealing every exit and turning the country into a digital cage. Instead, the conversation shifts to safer ground. Users complain about the stupidity of officials at the Federal Service for Supervision of Communications, Information Technology and Mass Media, who apparently believe that blocking Telegram will somehow solve the epidemic of phone scams. Everyone understands that this is not the real reason, but naming the real reason is dangerous. Some even blame Telegram itself for not negotiating with the authorities. Others focus on the inconvenience, the stress, the disruption of daily life. Anything at all, except the obvious point that the state treats its own citizens like minors who cannot be trusted to decide which apps they install on their own phones. The real average Russian. Outsiders might wonder, why do Russian people behave like this? Because the country itself is nothing like the image it projects to the outside world. Young, strong, uniformed, glorious, marching confidently into history with a clean jawline and a patriotic soundtrack. From a distance, at a parade, the crowd looks perfect. When you watch the column marching down the avenue, you cannot see individual faces. You see a formation, a symbol, a spectacle carefully framed by cameras. The big screen shows you the same image again. Disciplined soldiers, powerful machines, flags in the wind. The cameraman selects the angles that make the whole thing look magnificent. And the people standing in the crowd look at that screen and think, this is us. Look at us. How strong, how impressive. So they keep their eyes on the screen, because looking to the sides at the real faces around them is genuinely frightening. Now let me introduce the real country in bodies and routines. First, there's Elena. She is in her 40s. She works an average-paying job with long hours. She has 2 kids and an older parent who needs pills and attention. She doesn't think much about empires, geopolitics, or Russia's greatness. She's trying to keep her life from shrinking, and she's failing at that. She's already downgraded her domestic car to a Chinese one. Now she must choose groceries based on the price tag. Her salary is the same, but everyday stuff just keeps growing more expensive. Elena's anger is the anger of maintenance. The rage of someone forced to patch holes in a boat that keeps getting new holes. Then there's Kirill. He's around 20. He came to Moscow from a regional city to get a prestigious university degree and with it, a better future. His trigger is this future being stolen. When the state cuts university places and narrows acceptable fields, it feels like someone's kicking the ladder from under him. He's also living with the background hum of conscription fear. Not every young man will be taken, but every young man learns to think about it. Kirill's safe anger often looks like sarcasm, doom scrolling, rage at stupid rules, obsession with VPNs and blocked platforms, furious arguments about exams and admissions. It's future panic dressed up as everyday complaining. Now, Nina Ivanovna. She's a pensioner in her 70s. She watches television. In her young years, she's been trained to endure hardship and to despise weakness. Her safe anger target is always a person, never a system. A migrant, a trader, a rude teenager, or a nurse in the local clinic. Her anger is often loud because it is socially rewarded. It gives her status. It lets her feel like a guardian of order in a world where she has very little control. And then there's Sergei, a contract soldier who sees the Russian military machine from the inside. But even Sergei learns where the invisible fence stands. He can curse the quartermaster who lost the equipment. He can rage about commander who sends men forward without proper preparation. He can complain about late payments, broken vehicles, or missing drones. What he cannot say is, why were we sent into a pointless attack when everyone knew we could not take what we were ordered to capture? The country is soaked with anger, hidden underneath like water in a bog. But it cannot gather into a flood. That is why, from the outside, the country can look strangely calm. The Untouchable Enemy. Safe anger needs one more ingredient. A target you are allowed to hate without limits. Inside Russia, the target cannot be the Kremlin. It cannot be the president, the war planners, or the security apparatus. Those are untouchable in a different sense. Touching them brings consequences. So the system quietly supplies another enemy, one that is distant, abstract, and perfectly safe to attack. The West. It is large enough to explain anything, rich enough to be envied, powerful enough to be feared, and distant enough that insulting it carries no personal risk. If Elena cannot say that government decisions are destroying her purchasing power, she can say that sanctions from the West are strangling the country. If Kirill cannot openly question the political direction of the state, he can complain that Western hostility is stealing his future. If Nina Ivanovna needs a villain for the chaos she sees around her, television provides one every evening. And even Sergei, the soldier, can safely repeat the idea that Russia is not fighting a disastrous war. It is defending itself against NATO, America, or the collective West. Notice how perfectly this enemy fits the rules of safe anger. It is legitimate. State television, officials, and patriotic commentators repeat the message daily. It is emotionally real. Sanctions exist. Borders close. Flights disappear. Prices rise. It is morally justified. If the West is trying to destroy your country, anger becomes a patriotic duty, and it provides the illusion of agency. You can boycott Western brands. You can rage about NATO. You can argue online with foreigners and Russian immigrants. You can feel like you are defending your side. Most importantly, it keeps the forbidden target untouched. Instead of asking why their own leadership placed the country on a collision course with the world, people argue about Washington, Brussels, London, or NATO headquarters. The anger travels outward, and that is exactly the function of the untouchable enemy. It absorbs the rage that would otherwise flow toward the real center of power, like a lighting rod placed far away from the building. The storm is real, but the strike lands somewhere else. The eighth sin. There's a habit that makes safe anger almost automatic. I'm going to call it the eighth deadly sin, the sin of transfer. Transfer is when you hand your life to someone else. The decision-making, the risks, the costs, the responsibility, and the power. If someone else solves everything, then someone else owns everything. And you quietly stop living your own life. You don't take pride in what you build because you didn't build much. So you take pride in something that can't be taken away by a bad boss or a bad year, the country, the flag, the history. This is why a person can commit a crime and still feel clean. I was ordered to do this. What's my fault? I'm small. I'm nothing. Yelena doesn't say it out loud. She's too busy, but she lives inside this logic every time she hits a wall that isn't a wall, but a permission stamp. Her remote, recently constructed city district needs something basic. A clinic, a bus road, a post office after a fire. The local people have hands, they have brains, but they don't have the money, the documents, the right signatures, the right access. So what do? They don't organize a local budget fight, they don't sue, they don't build. They record the video and talk to the president like he's their family landlord. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. It looks absurd until you understand what it really is. It's a collective confession. Nothing depends on us. I have a dedicated video about this specific Russian genre. People asking Putin to fix potholes, wages, housing, and officials like he's the only adult in the country. It might look funny from the outside, but in truth, it's extremely dangerous for the country's future. This deeply embedded mechanism is how Russia always ends up with a czar, the only person on the top who can solve everything. Now look at how perfectly transfer plugs into safe anger. If the president is the solver, then the president is also untouchable. You can't aim your anger at the solver. That would mean admitting you handed him power and got burned. So anger has to be redirected. Elena's anger goes to the mayor, the principal, the telecom provider, or a bad neighbor. Kirill's anger goes to the exam system, the admission committee, the blocked platform, the VPN that failed right when he needs it. He doesn't say, my future is being narrowed by design. He says, everything is stupid. Nina Ivanovna's anger goes wherever television points it. America, Europe, the West, enemies, traitors. She doesn't feel powerless. Transfer gives her borrowed power. She's on the side of the solver, so she gets to judge. And Sergei, in uniform, is trapped in the most brutal form of transfer of all. He is literally paid to hand his life and decisions upward. If the command says go, he goes. If the system breaks him, he's supposed to call it doing my duty. And when he feels anger, it has to land somewhere that won't destroy him. Ukrainian civilians and prisoners of war. Escaping the action. Social sickness behaves like physical sickness. If you won't name the cause, you can't remove it. You can only try to mitigate the symptoms. In Russia, naming the cause feels terrifying because the country's memory of treatment is bloody. World War II was a slaughter, but at least the enemy was obvious, and there were allies you could rely on. The Russian Civil War was worse in a different way. It turned neighbors, friends, and even blood relatives into enemies. Families lived with the feeling that danger was everywhere and trust was impossible. In today's Russia, that memory got shoved into the back of the closet. People don't want to touch it. But the fear of another internal rupture is wild. So obedience can feel like salvation. Let's endure. Let's not poke the monster. Let's keep our anger in the safe zone. But that salvation is just postponement. If you want to understand how the terror of the Russian Civil War shaped our people, my Russian Treasures trilogy tells this story. The link is in the description. Now, I want to ask you something personal and a little uncomfortable. Where have you seen safe anger in real life? Not on the internet in general, in your world, at work, in a family, in a community, in a country, when the real source of the problem was untouchable. Who became the allowed target instead? A co-worker? A scapegoat manager? Migrants? Customers? The media? Some distant enemy? Tell me the scene. One concrete example. And tell me what it did to people over time. Because this is the quiet danger. Safe anger feels like courage, but it trains helplessness. It turns pressure into cruelty, and it keeps the real system intact. If this episode helped you put words to a pattern you've sensed for years, please like the video and subscribe. Share it with one person who keeps asking why are they mad at the wrong thing. And if you want to support this work directly, you can join my think tank or use PayPal or Super Thanks. You can also tap hype points to help the video travel. And for those listening on Spotify, hit follow so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for watching. See you again soon.